April 22nd was never supposed to begin with fire. It began with silence, a silence stretching across open water, broken only by the low hum of radar arrays and the distant churn of engines cutting through the Gulf. 40 nautical miles south of a contested coastline, a single vessel drifted into a zone it had no permission to enter. It carried no flag. Its transponder signal didn't match its registry, and its course was deliberate. The destroyer watching it had already issued warnings. 1, 3, 5, 7 in total, each one clearer than the last, each one ignored. This was not confusion. This was intent. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tension had already shifted. This was no longer a routine intercept. This was a test of rules, of resolve, of timing. Because the clock mattered. The ceasefire was hours from expiration, and both sides knew it. The vessel continued forward, increasing speed. No course correction, no response. Just a steady push toward a line that had been drawn with consequences. Command didn't hesitate. Orders were confirmed. Authorization codes verified. And then the first shot. Not to destroy, but to warn. A controlled burst tore across the bow, ripping through external structures, sending debris scattering across the deck. A second impact followed, more precise, targeting systems rather than lives. Smoke climbed into the sky in a thick, black column visible for miles. Only then did the ship stop. Engines cut, drifting. But what happened next was never meant to be seen as a victory, because the ship was never the objective. It was the signal. Within minutes, boarding teams secured the vessel. Communications were severed. Control was established. On paper, it was a textbook interception. But beneath the deck, the real operation had already begun. Hidden inside the cargo, masked under legitimate manifests, were sealed relay systems. Hardened, encrypted, designed for one purpose, to activate when silence replaced transmission. And the moment the ship went dark, the coastline, far beyond the horizon, received its message. Not a signal, not a transmission, an absence. And that absence was the trigger. Elsewhere, far from the scene, prepositioned units had already been waiting. Not reacting, not scrambling, waiting. Coordinates had been loaded days ago. Targets selected long before the ship ever entered the water. The interception was never meant to stop something. It was meant to start something. Within minutes, launch systems activated, fuel systems primed, guidance protocols aligned. And then the sky opened. Multiple trajectories. High-speed ballistic paths rising from concealed positions inland, arcing toward a target that hadn't moved in hours. A carrier group. Anchored. Predictable. Exposed. The first detection came instantly. Radar signatures confirmed. Threat classification escalated. 3 incoming. Impact window measured in minutes. Interceptors launched in response, climbing fast. Faster than anything visible to the naked eye. Calculations updated in real time. Angles adjusted. Kill vehicles separating at altitude. The first interception, clean. The second, successful but violent, detonating high above the atmosphere in a flash that lit the sky. The third didn't behave as expected. Something changed mid-flight. A deviation. A maneuver not accounted for in predictive models. Its descent shifted, not by chance, but by design. And that was enough. The intercept missed. Close, but not enough. Point defense systems engaged immediately. Automated. Relentless. Thousands of rounds per minute forming a wall between impact and survival. The warhead fragmented, but not completely. Burning debris scattered across open water and onto the deck. The damage was limited, but the message was clear. This was no longer controlled. And it wasn't over, because beneath the surface, something else had been moving. Slow, silent, waiting for the exact same signal. Hundreds of meters below the surface, the ocean didn't carry sound the same way. But trained ears knew what to listen for. The moment the signal was received above, it was received below. Orders were simple. Engage. Torpedo systems activated. Tubes flooded. Target solutions calculated using minimal exposure. No second chances. But in modern warfare, silence cuts both ways. Because the hunter was no longer alone. A second submarine, positioned defensively, detected the shift. Not visually, not directly, but through vibration. A transient. Small, but unmistakable. There was no time for confirmation, only decision, and that decision came in seconds. 2 torpedoes launched, not aimed at a fixed point, but at probability. One direct, one offset, a calculated spread designed to eliminate uncertainty. Below the surface, the response came instantly. Emergency maneuvers, rapid ascent, maximum speed. Too late. The first detonation struck near the propulsion systems, crippling movement. The second hit directly, and in less than a second, pressure did the rest. The ocean closed in. Complete. Final. No debris surfaced. No signals returned. But above the surface, escalation was accelerating faster than anyone predicted, because the next wave wasn't underwater. It was airborne. From hardened positions inland, a swarm launched simultaneously. Not large, not individually powerful, but coordinated. Low altitude. Terrain masking. Designed to avoid detection until the last possible moment. By the time they appeared on radar, they were already close. Very close. Response time shrank from minutes to seconds. Defensive systems activated across multiple vessels at once. Interceptors launched in rapid succession. Autonomous tracking assigned targets faster than human operators could process. But numbers matter, and so does timing. Explosions filled the airspace surrounding the formation. Interception succeeded, one after another, but not all. Some got through. One struck. Direct impact against forward systems. The detonation wasn't massive, but it was precise. Secondary explosions followed as stored munitions reacted. The ship remained afloat, but its role in the fight was over. Casualties reported, damage contained, but the formation had changed, and so had the rules, because at this point, containment was no longer an option. Authorization had already been prepared long before this moment, not as a reaction, as a contingency, and now it was active, far beyond the battlefield, high above reach. Aircraft that had been waiting for hours received new instructions. Coordinates updated. Targets confirmed. No warning. No escalation ladder. Just execution. Precision-guided munitions released from altitude, descending toward hardened structures believed to be untouchable. Underground facilities. Command centers. Strategic nodes. Each one struck within minutes. Simultaneously, long-range systems launched from unseen platforms moved toward coastal infrastructure. Radar arrays. Communication hubs. Targeting systems. All removed. Not gradually. Not partially. Completely. Within a single operational window, the battlefield changed shape. The systems that coordinated the attack were gone. The networks that enabled targeting, severed. And the ability to continue, reduced to near zero. By the time the final explosions faded, the region fell into something it hadn't experienced in hours. Silence. Not the calm kind. The kind that follows overwhelming force. On the surface, damage control teams worked through smoke and debris. Fires contained. Systems restored where possible. Casualties evacuated. Every action measured. Every second critical. But beyond the immediate battlefield, something more important was happening. Analysis. Because the pattern was now clear. This was never a spontaneous escalation. It was planned. Layered. Timed around a deadline everyone had been watching. The intercepted ship was not a mistake. Not a smuggler. Not a rogue element. It was Phase 1. A deliberate trigger designed to force a predictable response. And everything that followed had already been set in motion before that response ever happened. Which meant one thing. This wasn't over. Because if Phase 1 required sacrifice, then Phase 2 would require something else. Something larger. Something less visible. And possibly already in position. The narrow waterway at the center of it all continues to carry a significant portion of the world's energy supply. Every hour it remains open, stability holds. Every hour it doesn't, everything changes. Control of that passage is no longer just strategic. It's symbolic, and both sides have already paid a price to claim it. One in infrastructure, the other in lives. But the deeper question isn't what happened. It's what happens next. Because somewhere, beyond radar coverage, beyond satellite focus, beyond what has already been revealed, another asset is waiting. Another signal is pending. And the next move may not come from the sea. The silence didn't last. It never does. Because in modern conflict, silence is not the end of action. It is the space where the next move is already unfolding. Far from the burning decks and shattered systems. Far beyond the visible battlefield. Decisions were being made in rooms, without windows. Rooms where screens replaced horizons, and data replaced instinct. What they were seeing now didn't match the expectations. Not entirely. Because the response had been too fast. Too coordinated. Too prepared. This wasn't retaliation. This was preloaded execution. Which meant something critical had already been confirmed. The first phase had succeeded. Not tactically, but strategically. The interception, the moment that looked like control, had in reality been the point of surrender. Not of territory, but of initiative. Because from that moment forward, every action had been reactive. And the other side had been counting on that. But now the battlefield had shifted again. And with that shift came a dangerous uncertainty. Because once command structures are destroyed, control doesn't disappear. It fragments. And fragmented control is harder to predict, harder to track, and often more dangerous. Across multiple locations, units that had not yet engaged were now cut off from central command. No direct orders, no real-time coordination, only pre-assigned directives and limited autonomy. And that changes behavior, because when communication dies, protocol takes over. And protocol, unlike strategy, doesn't adapt. It executes. That meant there were still assets in play, still systems unaccounted for, still operators with standing instructions that had not yet been overridden. And somewhere within those standing instructions was Phase 2. The first indication came not from radar, but from absence again. A surveillance satellite passed over a previously active site, one identified days earlier as a logistical support node. It should have shown movement, heat signatures, vehicles. Instead, nothing. Cold, empty, abandoned too quickly to be routine. And that raised a different kind of alarm, because assets don't disappear without purpose. They relocate. And relocation means intent. Within minutes, additional surveillance was redirected, broader sweeps, pattern analysis, cross-referencing known supply routes with recent gaps in observation. And slowly, a picture began to form. Not complete, but enough. Multiple small movements, individually insignificant, but collectively aligned. Not toward the coastline, not toward open confrontation, but inward, deeper, away from the expected battle space. Which meant the next phase was not about direct engagement. It was about reach. And reach changes everything. Back on the water, the surviving ships had already repositioned. Defensive perimeters tightened. Sensor coverage expanded. Air patrols extended beyond standard range. They weren't waiting anymore. They were preparing. Because now the threat wasn't something you could see approaching across the horizon. It was something that could emerge from anywhere. The idea of a second wave was no longer theoretical. It was inevitable, but its form was still unknown. Hours passed. No launches, no signals, no visible movement. And that was the most dangerous part, because the longer nothing happened, the more pressure built inside decision-making chains. Was it over? Had the response eliminated the capability entirely? Or was the delay intentional? A calculated pause designed to reset the board? Because time, in this scenario, wasn't neutral. Time was leverage, and whoever controlled the next moment of action would control the narrative. Then it happened. Not with an explosion, not with a launch, but with a disruption. A sudden, localized failure across multiple systems, not just military, but civilian. Navigation interruptions, communication delays, signal interference across commercial frequencies. At first, it looked like coincidence, a glitch, but the pattern spread. Not randomly, systematically. And that's when the realization hit. This wasn't kinetic. It was digital. Phase 2 had begun. Unlike missiles or drones, this attack didn't announce itself. There were no trajectories to track, no interceptors to launch, only effects. And those effects were immediate. Ships relying on satellite navigation experienced drift in positioning data, coordinates misaligned by just enough to create confusion. Not catastrophic, but dangerous. Aircraft systems flagged inconsistencies. Communication relays dropped and reconnected unpredictably. And on shore, critical infrastructure began reporting anomalies. Nothing destroyed, but everything disrupted. Because the objective wasn't impact. It was uncertainty. And uncertainty spreads faster than fire. Attempts to isolate the source began immediately. Cyber defense teams moved to contain, reroute, stabilize. But the attack wasn't centralized. It was distributed. Fragments of code embedded across multiple entry points, activated simultaneously. Each one performing a small function, harmless on its own. But together, coordinated chaos.